Hello, my name is Lupilo and I am curious about China strategically expanding its international military presence. Will China be able to encircle India and avoid the Malaca Dilemma? There's a multitude of interests and coalitions in the Indo-Pacific at play, mirroring a realist's general perspective and questioning who can do what to who. The US can, with its regional allies, can block the Strait of Malacca to impede the crossing of Chinese imports. Most of China's imports derive from the Middle East and Angola. Currently, 80% of China's oil must pass through the Strait of Malacca, a narrow stretch of water between the Indonesian island of Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula. With Singapore, a major US ally that frequently participates in US naval drills, located at the mouth of the strait's eastern opening, the Strait of Malacca becomes a natural strategic choke point. In the event of a conflict, the Malacca Strait could easily be blocked by a rival nation, cutting off China from crucial energy resources. The closest alternative is the Sunda Strait, whose narrowness and shallowness make it unsuitable as a passageway for large, modern ships. Other alternatives, such as the Lombok and Makassar Straits, are much longer routes that would incur additional shipping costs estimated to be from around $84 to $220 billion per year, according to RSIS. As such, the Chinese government has taken a number of steps to reduce the country's over-reliance on the Strait of Malacca. These include the Kazakhstan-China pipeline, which connects the country to the oil-rich Caspian region, and the Myanmar-Yunnan pipelines, which siphons oil and gas from the Bay of Bengal to the Kunming region of China, avoiding the Malacca Strait for Burmese oil imports. The most effective way to avoid the Malacca Strait altogether would be to build a canal across the Kra Isthmus of southern Thailand, providing an alternative shipping route. In an ideal scenario for China, Beijing would retain control over the area in return for building the canal, much like how the US Panama Canal Zone operated before full control was handed over to Panama in 1999. However, Thailand would be hard-pressed to accept such a deal. The country is not as weak economically or politically as Panama was during the 19th century, and so would be much less willing to grant China the right to use and control strategically important territory. Should China not be able to secure control over the area, the canal would be vulnerable to hostile entities and leave China stranded in essentially the situation it stands in today. Shipments would have to be unloaded and reloaded at both ends, and the canal would itself become another strategic choke point. Also important is the estimated cost of the project, an estimated whopping $25 billion, and the logistical nightmare it entails. In light of this fact, perhaps the most interesting and viable alternative is the Guangdong-Xinjiang pipeline. As part of its Belt and Road Initiative BRI, the Chinese government invested in a series of transportation and energy infrastructure development projects in Pakistan valued at $62 billion. The economic corridor would provide China access to Pakistan's Gwadar port in the Arabian Sea, nicknamed the crown jewel of China's string of pearls. A network of Chinese naval facilities in the Indian Ocean. Gwadar is a deep sea port in close proximity to both the Middle East and the Strait of Hormuz. Gwadar, deep sea port in southern Pakistan, is envisaged to be the crux of China's Belt and Road Initiative. The most important advantage of the Guangdong-Xinjiang pipeline is that it enables China to bypass the Malacca Strait altogether. Middle Eastern shipping tankers could simply dock in Gwadar, where the oil would be extracted and further transported to China through a series of pipelines. The Iran-Pakistan pipeline could also be linked to Gwadar and potentially provide an additional avenue of energy imports to the Chinese industrial machine and increase the security of its energy supply. Although this option is comparatively more expensive than others, it notably maintains China's connection to Middle Eastern oil supplies in an efficient and comparatively secure manner, should a crisis arise in the Strait of Malacca. However, despite Beijing's aggressive attempts at diversification, it will continue to remain dependent on the Malacca Strait in the short term. The Kazakhstan, China, and Myanmar Yunnan provide only 400,000 and 420,000 barrels a day respectively, compared to the 6.5 million China-bound barrels that pass through the strait daily. As such, China is attempting to significantly expand its naval power projection capabilities to defend its access to energy. One strategy is the development of the famous String of Pearls, a series of Chinese naval bases in the Indian Ocean. The string not only serves to protect China's sea lines of communication that are crucial for seaborne trade, but also provides an additional avenue of deployment points for the Chinese Navy. A modernized People's Liberation Army Navy coupled with a ring of staging points across the Indian Ocean could provide China some semblance of security. But because of the US Navy's heavy presence near Singapore, the Strait of Malacca would remain significantly vulnerable to a China-focused blockade. As China's shortfall in domestic production and energy consumption continues to grow, a viable new route will need to be established in the long term. Deng's reforms created lasting impact on the world's most populous nation and propelled China to become a major player in the international stage. Yet they also created a supreme dependence on energy, and the country lacks the natural resources to fulfill its needs domestically. The Gwadar-Xinjiang pipeline is the only feasible project currently underway that provides an alternative to the Malacca Strait altogether, and it seems that China is hedging on its success. However, Gwadar Port is still under construction with estimates ranging from 2025 to 2030 for completion, and so, until then, Beijing will try its best to acquire influence over the Malacca Strait at any costs. Expect more Chinese meddling in the Malay Peninsula. China is securing international military base access agreements to expand the global reach of its armed forces, a counter to America's extended deterrence strategy for Taiwan while threatening India with encirclement. This month, RAND released a report detailing how China is advancing its global military reach by negotiating base access agreements to expand its security footprint and enable overseas operations for the People's Liberation Army (PLA) and the People's Armed Police (PAP). Despite efforts to build a network of strategic strongpoints and logistics support bases, including in commercial ports, the PLA's capacity for higher-end combat operations from these locations is limited. The RAND report suggests that increased PLA naval and air defense activities in overseas bases could indicate a shift to a more aggressive stance, but logistical and political challenges make it unlikely for PLA bases to pose a significant threat to US military interests over the next decade. Still, this assessment might underestimate the rapid advancements in Chinese military technology and strategic planning. In a June 2024 article for the national interest TNI, Brandon Weichert notes China is set to possess the biggest fleet of aircraft carriers worldwide, underscoring its massive shipbuilding advantages vis the US. Weichert asserts that the People's Liberation Army Navy PLA aims to use these assets to prevent US forces from entering the Indo-Pacific, thereby asserting regional dominance. He says the PLA envisions its carriers as floating command centers in any potential conflict, such as an invasion or blockade of Taiwan. He also suggests that the US must adapt to a new era of contested regional waters and Chinese warships deployed in the Western Hemisphere. China may be seeking base access in the Western Hemisphere to challenge the US's extended deterrence in a Taiwan conflict by leveraging the threat of a direct attack on the US mainland. In a 2023 article for the Peruvian Army Center for Strategic Studies, Robert Ellis points out that with base access in Cuba, China could conduct special operations, disrupt the US military and attack the US military, and attack the US mainland to snap key defense supply chains in a conflict scenario. Moreover, Gordon Chang warns in a June 2023 Gatestone Institute article that China could deploy long-range missiles in Cuba to hit US Navy bases in Florida, block the movement of US vessels, and shoot down planes over the southeastern US. Meanwhile, India is concerned that China will use its economic clout to gain base access at Gwadar in Pakistan and Hambantota in Sri Lanka, bolstering its lone overseas military base at Djibouti. This situation would challenge India's dominance of the Indian Ocean and raise fears of encirclement. Isaac Carden notes in a February 2023 Free Foreign Policy at Brookings briefing that while China's base at Djibouti can support its naval operations in the Indian Ocean, It lies at the end of tenuous supply lines. Carden says that China's Djibouti facility is isolated and operationally limited because it does not receive mutual support from other Chinese military facilities in the Indian Ocean. However, Carden points out that China's dual-use commercial facilities at Gwadar and Hambantota have nonetheless become important nodes for its naval operations. As for Gwadar, Carden and other authors mention in an August 2020 China Maritime Studies Institute report that the facility can become a long-term rest and replenishment location for the PLAN, noting its geographic location, military importance, and Chinese port operator. Carden and others also say that some circles in the PLA believe that Chinese base access to Gwadar is already as good as established, quoting a PLA officer saying, "The food is already on the plate, we'll eat it whenever we want to." Likewise, the South China Morning Post SCMP reported in July 2023 that Hambantota will most likely be China's next military base in the Indian Ocean, pointing out that China has direct control of the facility and represents its single largest port investment. In a military sense, Gwadar and Hambantota can support a more persistent Chinese naval presence in the Indian Ocean, which could eventually threaten India's sea-based nuclear deterrent. Asia Times noted this month that India may be planning to turn the Bay of Bengal into a bastion for its nuclear ballistic missile submarines SSBN, with the area's deep waters providing better cover than the congested waters of the Arabian Sea. Operating from a massive submarine base at Rambili, India's SSBNs would patrol the Bay of Bengal with the area protected by surface assets such as aircraft carriers and destroyers. Such a strategy would allow India to launch nuclear-tipped submarine-launched ballistic missiles SLBM at Pakistan and China undetected. However, China-India nuclear tensions are most likely to result from mutual penetrations of each other's bastions using conventional assets. In that scenario, Chinese warships operating from Gwadar and Hambantota may track the movement of India's SSBNs. At the same time, India is considering boosting its South China Sea naval presence, where China intends to establish a bastion for its SSBNs, mirroring India's intentions in the Bay of Bengal.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your people.